Hey friends, Scott Beckstead here on another Wild Horse Wednesday. This message is for Nevada State Senator Ira Hansen. Senator Hansen, I'm challenging you to debate me on the topic of wild horses and public lands in Nevada. You are either grossly misinformed, Senator Hansen, or you are a shameless shill for the livestock and mining industries. So, Senator Hansen, do you have the guts to face me, an American taxpayer, to defend your claims about wild horse overpopulation and a catastrophic harm being done to the ecosystem? I'm ready when you are. Name the time, name the place, name the platform. I'll be there. And you better have actual evidence, because as a former litigator with 17 years of courtroom experience, that's what I will expect from you.
So that was our challenge. And so first slide is actually, this is the current feral horse populations according to the Bureau of Land Management in the West. Okay, Nevada is about 60% of that. Our graph is almost identical. The number of feral horses in Nevada right now are right at about 50,000. The correct appropriate management levels, which we'll talk about in a minute, are actually the red line. They are not to exceed that red line by federal law.
It is livestock, not wild horses, causing harm to the range. So be prepared to tell us how many wild horses there are versus how many commercial livestock on Nevada's public lands.
Wild horses. Now look at the range conditions in the picture. The upper picture is already, by the way, bad. But in the lower picture, again, this is what horses will do. There hasn't been a cow or sheep on that allotment in at least 15 to 20 years. Well, let's look at some more pictures. Gee, guess what? Not a cow for almost 30 years on this riparian zone. That is a spring, and that is a horrible, terrible picture of what happens when you have excessive numbers of not livestock, but feral horses on that population or on that spot. Here's another one. Deer Springs, located in the Antelope Valley herd management area, no livestock, has grazed the area around the spring since the early 1980s. The picture on the left was taken in 1984 when cows were still there. The picture on the right was taken in 2021, same exact spring, same location, and one has no cows and the other has enough horses to totally annihilate the entire riparian zone around that spring.
And just last year, I drove through the heart of wild horse country in central Nevada, and you know what I found? Thousands and thousands of skinny cows trying to survive out on the rocks. And how many wild horses did I see? 12. 12 wild horses. They were fat, they were happy, they were thriving, but 12 horses.
Too, Mr. Beckstead, in his invitation to me to have this debate, mentioned that he had done a survey. He had actually driven across central Nevada. And in his drive across central Nevada, he saw thousands of skinny cows and only 12 fat, healthy horses. Now, for those of you you should be absolutely stunned that is seriously taken as some sort of census technique. And when you see how the BLM actually does it, and the Department of Wildlife, and the Nevada Department of Agriculture, and the numbers that they come up with, and then have them totally dismissed because of wildlife photographers and tourists and driving across the state of Nevada, in central Nevada, and then determining you from that experience. Now you can criticize the Bureau of Land Management, the range managers, the scientists that have done this.
You better have actual evidence. And I'm not talking about BLM or beef industry propaganda. I'm talking about actual evidence.
And we need to understand, when the Bureau of Land Management does its surveys, how do they do it? They first do an aerial survey, then they do an aerial infrared survey, then they do a ground count, then they have several methods of cross-checking to make sure that they actually have a very accurate count of the horses. Where are your numbers coming from? Where do you have the right to challenge all of these agencies and claim their numbers are wrong? What are the correct numbers according to you?
I'm not challenging their research because they haven't done any. They don't have any data.
BLM would have us dismiss what photographers, tourists, and advocates document every day. Thriving, robust families of horses living peacefully on vast stretches of federal lands. Now, I have read all of his debates, and not in a single time has he actually produced evidence or some sort of survey or anything. And as you can tell by looking at both the ground that they're pounding across and the ribs that are sticking through, we have, this is a Nevada Nevada picture of Nevada rangeland. We have a serious ecological problem when the horses start to look like that. Here's another one. Here's a little foal dying at a drying up water hole, but notice the condition of the land around the horse. It looks like the moon. Here we go. Look at the condition of the range around those horses drinking in that water hole. Now, apparently, we're supposed to believe that that damage was done by livestock. But again, no livestock have been anywhere near this.
I love nothing more than cross-examining my opponents of the horse. Horses originated and evolved here on the North American continent beginning over 50 million years ago. And my friend Eric Molvar, wildlife biologist, said wild horses were co-evolving with the native vegetation and wildlife for over 50 million years. They evolved to the current species right here in North America.
So instead, they now try to claim that, no, the indigenous populations of the United States have been saying that they never left after the Pleistocene. Well, at the time of the Pleistocene, we were in an ice age. We had ancient Lake Lahontan here. We had the dire wolf. We had saber-toothed cats. We had short-faced bears. We had the American cheetah, the American lion, which all ate the horses. So the horses that actually lived on Nevada were about the size of a Shetland pony, and they died out at the time of the Pleistocene, okay? So the idea that the horses that are here are somehow descendants of animals that have been on this continent forever is just absolute nonsense. They've done several studies, genetic and DNA studies. The average horse on the Nevada ranges, if you were to take a sample of their blood and compare it to the horses right on the closest ranch to it, they're almost a perfect match. So that idea that these animals have been here for 10,000 years, and even if they did, in fact, evolve here, the range is totally different.
Horses are a native indigenous species. Sheep and cattle are not indigenous. They are invasive.
And as far as the idea of cows being non-native, just so you know, during the Pleistocene, there were actually 2 bovine species that went extinct. So if we're going to use the romanticized image, we can very clearly say that the cattle that exist on Nevada ranges today are descendants of the Texas Longhorns that came with the conquistadors. My point is this romanticizing and trying to make native out of something that's clearly not native, and to pretend that the conditions on the range right now in Nevada are somehow the same as the very end of the Pleistocene. It's just, you know, it's embarrassing.
But let's talk about all Nevada ungulates combined, all Nevada hoofed animals combined. Cattle, 430,000 head of cattle in Nevada, 58,000 head of sheep, and horses and burros, 50,000. What this all translates to is that all of the non-horse ungulates are outnumbering horses 12-1.
Remember, the big giant difference between livestock and horses is timing. Horses are on the range year round. They are pounding the perennial grasses that exist to death year round. And like I said with the pruning example, when the horses consistently are on the same plant year round, just like pruning that tree, if you prune it constantly, it will die. And that's exactly what has happened on Nevada rangeland. And the problem that we have now at 50,000, remember, every 4 years they double. In 4 years, you're going to have 100,000. And is the problem going to go away at that point? No. The problem will only exacerbate with time, and it is almost irreparable for decades to get those perennial grass communities, forb communities, and the shrub communities back that actually belong here, that actually are native. And in the absence of those, not only are the horses harmed, but the wildlife. We haven't talked at all. Mr. Beckstead divides the whole world up into horses and livestock.
So yeah, I do get a little worked up about the BLM. I am a little bit cynical at this point and very skeptical about the claims that the BLM makes. And it's because they're driving a false narrative. Look, we, the American taxpayers who support wild horses and burros on our public lands, want the lies to stop. The BLM and all the others that are pushing these lies about an overpopulation that's causing ecological damage, it's time to stop spreading false information about wild horses and burros. Stop blaming and scapegoating and persecuting wild horses and burros so that you can put more livestock out on the range. And start telling the truth.
Now, Mr. Beckstead challenges the BLM numbers. He has the first slide I showed. The BLM actually requested from the National Academy of Sciences, very prestigious organization, to do a review of their entire program. This report was issued in 2013, and Mr. Beckstead was correct in this regard. The BLM numbers were incorrect. In fact, the BLM had grossly underrepresented the number of horses on the rangelands by a factor of 10 to 30%. And that is right here what they're saying. Now, we also have to understand, we are talking about population growth. And Mr. Beckstead and his position is that we have no need to get involved in it because the horses will naturally regulate their populations. When this was reviewed, this concept was reviewed by the National Academy of Sciences. Here is actually what they said. Compelling evidence exists that there are more horses on public rangelands than reported at the national level. In other words, the BLM numbers were too low. And that horse population growth rates are high. 20% a year is the average. Unmanaged populations will probably double in about 4 years. One thing that's really been disturbing in this debate is the horse advocates tend to split us into two categories. There are horse lovers, them, and there are horse haters, which are basically people that believe that we need some serious management. The horse issue in my own family, I grew up with horses. My dad loved horses. The picture on the screen is actually my daughter, Larissa, on our horse, Lakota. And then, that's my daughter, Mallory, on our horse, Bo. And this is a picture of my daughter and her cousin, Leah, at the, how do you correctly say it? The Gymkhana, where they were young rodeo people. So anyway, I don't want to be painted into a corner that somehow, because I believe we need some serious management of the feral horses on the Nevada ranges, that I hate horses. Nothing could be further from the truth. Mr. Beckstead, you constantly belittle the men and women of the Bureau of Land Management, calling them, quote, liars, self-styled cowboys, spinning a false narrative. They do not care. BLM has nothing but utter contempt for horses and the people who love them, quote, cruel and arrogant, quote, terrorizing these vulnerable animals. I could go on and on. Yet the men and women of the Bureau of Land Management, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the U.S. Forest Service, the Nevada Department of Wildlife, and the entire scientific community are in agreement on the need to manage horses. Do you feel that you owe an apology for your incredibly vicious slanders of the good men and women of these agencies?
Thanks for the question. I certainly don't view it as vicious slander. I'm simply looking at what's happening out on the rangelands. I have made a number of road trips, Jackie and I, through Nevada, through the heart of wild horse country. And every time, including today or yesterday, when I drove from Reno to here, I saw a lot of livestock and I didn't see a single horse.